Hello, my name's Vince Sheehan and today I'd like to talk about Zulu, the 1964 film directed by Cy Enfield, which stars Stanley Baker, Michael Caine, Jack Hawkins, Ulla Jacobson and James Booth. And I'd like to talk about the structure of this film and also discuss some of the themes that crop up in it. I love this film, so I'm really pleased to do this video. Now, Zulu, of course, centres around the Anglo-Zulu War at the end of the 19th century, and it centres in on the Battle of Rorke's Drift, this famous battle between roughly 100 and I think it was 139 British soldiers defending this outpost with a hospital and fighting against 4,000 or so Zulus who were attacking. And the British famously defended this position, repelled the Zulus, and really caught the imagination of the Victorian public back in Britain. Now, the film is really in three parts with an introduction. And even before the introduction, just past the titles, and also at the very end of the film, we have a minute or so of narration by no less an actor than Richard Burton. And right at the very beginning of the film, we're told that there's been this terrible massacre of British troops at the Battle of Isandlwana. And it's because of this battle, the defeat of the British, that the Zulus turn their attention on Rorke's Drift, which forms the bulk of the story. Now, after this brief narration at the beginning of the film, we come to the introduction of the film, this Zulu wedding. And we have, in a very colourful and vivid way, we have these two rows of young Zulus, the young warriors on one side and the maidens on the other, who are about to be married. And they dance this wonderful dance and with this wonderful music. And that really brings to the fore a recurring theme in this film, that of music and of song. And that certainly comes back later on in the film. Watching this spectacle is, of course, the chief and also two Swedish missionaries. There's Otto Witt, who is this real Bible-bashing, evangelical, zealous man of God who loves quoting the Bible, but who also has a great deal of respect for the Zulu people. And with him is his daughter Margarita, who is this very young, very kind of prim and proper lady, who is rather shocked by this display in front of her of these scantily clad young men and young women. She seems somewhat drawn to it as well, it has to be said. Eventually news comes that that there's been a skirmish with the British, or indeed, it's a terrible battle actually, and the Swedish missionaries feel they have to flee for their lives, and they do. And that brings us to the first act, where the British are preparing for the battle. We're introduced to Lieutenant Shard, who's in charge of this kind of troop of Royal Engineers. They're building a bridge by this place called Rorke's Drift. And Shard is soon joined by Lieutenant Bromhead, and he is this rather, arrogant and kind of very well-spoken officer. Shard seems, far more kind of ordinary guy. And, they're kind of chalk and cheese, I suppose. And they're kind of, trying to get one up on each other in what they're saying, etc. And Bromhead realises actually Shard has the seniority, so it's Shard who is kind of in charge. And he respects that eventually, and it's quite charming. And this is really kind of Michael Caine's first starring role, and he's absolutely fantastic in it. And so is Stanley Baker, who plays Shard. I mean, they're both great throughout the whole film. Eventually, the Swedish missionaries arrive here at Rorke's Drift, and this contingent of kind of South African Boer um, troops who won't stay with them. They tell them of the impending danger of the Zulus, that they're on their way, but they won't help defend. They just realise they're all going to get slaughtered, and they encourage them to get out of there. But Shard decides to stay put, and they start building defences. And as a kind of a smaller subplot in this film, we also have this kind of anti-hero character. He's this criminal called Hook, who is locked up in a cell, and he's a real scoundrel, and he's described as a malingerer. He won't do any of the work the other soldiers do. But much of the attention and the focus is around him as well. In this first act of the film, they're kind of preparing, and they get the defences set up, etc. Now, while this is happening, Reverend Otto Witt, the Swedish missionary, he's trying to encourage the soldiers just to get out of there, and he wants to save the sick as well, as with his daughter. He's preaching peace. He just doesn't want to fight. They'll be like Cain from the Old Testament if they stay there. There'll be blood on their hands. And his words seem to have an effect on some of the soldiers. And eventually he's locked up. And in the second act of the film we hear the Zulus approach. This really focuses around the battle itself. And in a brilliant way, these two sentries on the hill suddenly hear this sound, this rumbling sound. And then Bromhead hears it, and he says it's like a train, you hear this sound. And they realise the Zulus are on their way. And then indeed the Zulus do eventually attack. And the Zulus are this mighty presence on the hill, and their warriors come down in waves attacking Rorke's Drift. They have these guns as well. They fire from up on the hill, although they're not very good shots. And it's just wave after wave of attack. And they're trying to exploit the different walls, etc. And Shard has to make these difficult decisions about where to put most of his men, etc. And it's and it's really exciting, and the way it's on all these films on an epic scale. It's so impressive just to see all these thousands of people involved. It's so great. No CGI or anything. They're just all real people. It's really good. And eventually, the church is used as a kind of a hospital. And Reverend Witt isn't happy about this, and we realise also he loves a drink. He's clearly an alcoholic, so he's getting plastered. And eventually, him and his daughter are kind of kicked out for their own safety, really, but also to boost the morale of the troops. The men are really up against it. They're kind of in this confined area, the British soldiers, and they're just fighting continually against this onslaught of the Zulu warriors. And eventually the place catches fire, and Hook decides to fight as well here. He's been a malingerer, but he decides to get involved, this kind of scoundrel. And the place is completely engulfed in flames, but the British fight on, and eventually it's night time, and there seems to be a lull in the proceedings. And this brings us on to the last act. In the next morning, they're wondering, well, when they're going to attack next, the Zulus, is this it? Is this the end? But then they hear the Zulus singing up on the hill. And they're thinking, oh no, here we go again. But then they start singing as well, the Men of Harlech, and this is because they're a Welsh regiment. They're singing this wonderful song, and it's a really memorable moment in this film. There's kind of a sing-off between the British soldiers and the Zulu warriors. There's a lot of musicality in this film, and That bolsters everyone, the morale of the British soldiers. And there's one last throw of the dice by the Zulus. They run down and they seem to breach the walls. But with this, I don't know what the name of it, but there's this military action where there's two rows of soldiers. The first ones kneel down, the other ones shoot, and then they kind of repeat that action moving forward. They manage to repel the Zulus, and there's like mounds of dead bodies. You know, it's pretty grim. And then they hear the Zulus again, and they're singing again, and I think, oh no, please, they're going to annihilate us. We can't do this any longer. But it turns out that they're actually saluting the bravery of the British soldiers. And it's a very moving moment. These great fearsome warriors are kind of applauding the fighting spirit and the bravery of these British soldiers. And then there's this brief coda where we have the narration again, and it's about how the Victoria Cross was awarded to all these brave soldiers. Now, of course, the themes in this film include colonialism, marriage, alcoholism, imprisonment, anti-hero, as encapsulated by Hook. Also this idea about being up against the odds. And a lot about song and music, which is a real refreshing element to this war film. Also says much about the sheer horror and waste of life of war as well. Right at the end of the film, Shard and Bromhead discuss just the sense of emptiness and guilt and the erosion of their humanity through being involved with such a bloody conflict. But yeah, Zulu is just such a fantastic film, and if you haven't seen it, please go watch it on DVD or Blu-ray. And I'll just put a brief slideshow about some of the themes and the structure just after this. Thanks for watching.